Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleague, Senator Markey and Senator Whitehouse. I'm pleased to join both of you who have done such a tremendous job in leading on this issue of trying to get everyone to wake up to the challenges that we face from climate change and what that's going to mean, not just for us in New England, but for people across this country and across the globe. Last week, as you all have said, and maybe the reason we feel so passionate about this is because we see it. We see it happening already in New England, as my colleagues detailed so well. We're on the cutting edge of these changes, and you don't have to have lived in New Hampshire for very long to see what's happening as the result of climate change. Last week, the U.S. Global Change Research Program released its 4th National Climate Assessment, and that details the profound effect that climate change is having, and that it's going to continue to have on the environment, on the economy, and on our public health. And the report makes it abundantly clear that every American is affected by climate change, and that the threat it poses will get worse unless we take action. And as I said, people in my state of New Hampshire have no doubt about the reality of climate change because we've been seeing it for years now. We've been experiencing it. The steady increase in temperatures, the rise in annual precipitation, they're already affecting New Hampshire's tourism and outdoor recreation economy. Each year, hundreds of thousands of sportsmen and wildlife watchers come to New Hampshire to enjoy our mountains, our lakes, all of our beautiful natural resources. The outdoor economy, hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation contribute more than $4 billion to New Hampshire's economy each year. But this is threatened now because rising temperatures are shortening our fall foliage season. They're negatively affecting our snow and ice-related winter recreation activities. That includes skiing, snowboarding, and snowmobiling. The New Hampshire ski industry employs 17,000 Granite staters, and the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services warns that these jobs are threatened by climate change. And New Hampshire's, in fact, all of New England's fall foliage is at risk. This is climate modeling by the Union of Concerned Scientists that shows that by the end of this century, New Hampshire summers will feel like present-day summers in North Carolina, 700 miles to our south, and while the presiding officer certainly understands that that works great for North Carolina, it changes dramatically what happens in New Hampshire. And what this shows is that this red color, which are the maple and beech and birch trees, the maple trees in particular, that produce our maple syrup, that make such a difference in our fall foliage, those are going to be gone by 2070, by the end of this century. All this red that we're seeing throughout, from Pennsylvania, New York, across northern New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, that's all gone by the end of this century. So this underscores, again, that if we fail to act on climate change, we're going to see a steep loss of jobs and revenue that's going to affect our outdoor recreation industry. And it's going to affect our traditional maple syrup industry. New Hampshire produces more than 100,000 gallons of maple syrup annually. That makes it the 3rd largest maple syrup producer among the New England states. And maple syrup is entirely dependent on weather conditions. We're already seeing now the impact that these changes are having because as we get into the spring, the temperatures are not getting cold enough at night to make the sap run in the maple trees. And the days, we're not seeing the fluctuation in temperatures that allows maple syrup to be produced. The National Climate Assessment notes that the changing climate is putting more and more stress on sugar maples. And if we fail to act on climate change, this could destroy New Hampshire's multi-million-dollar maple syrup industry. Now, it's also affecting our wildlife. It's affecting their habitats. And probably one of the most iconic symbols of New Hampshire is our moose. And yet, they're being threatened Because of milder winters due to climate change, ticks and other insects aren't dying off. That leads to infestation on our wildlife and our trees. And according to New Hampshire's Fish and Game Department, the estimated moose population in New Hampshire has decreased by more than 50% since the mid-1990s. That story's even worse for moose calves. A recent study by researchers at the University of New Hampshire found that winter ticks are the primary cause of an unprecedented 70% death rate of calves over a 3-year period. On average, and we can see this dramatically in these photos, 47,000 ticks were found on each calf that was monitored during this study. And to quote Dr. Peter Peekins, a professor at UNH, who is a lead author on the study, he says, "The iconic moose is rapidly becoming the new poster child for climate change in parts of the Northeast." We are going to see moose totally disappearing from the Northeast, and in fact, all of the northern part of the United States, if we don't take action. And as my colleagues have said, global warming is also impacting our fishing industry. New Hampshire may have a small coast, 18 miles of coastline, but we have an important commercial fishing industry that contributes $106 million to the state and supports 5,000 jobs. Unfortunately, because of climate change, the average annual temperatures in the waters off of southern New England have increased by about 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1970s. And this change in temperature is driving some of New England's most iconic fisheries northward and further out to sea. Lobsters, for example, have migrated 40 miles northward to the Gulf of Maine in the last decade. And as we can see from this photo illustration, it shows the red areas where we used to have lobster until the 70s. They've totally disappeared, and those lobsters have moved north of Cape Cod, north, they're moving into northern Maine and up into Canada. They're totally gone from the New England Sound. That's devastating to southern New Hampshire fishing communities where lobster is their livelihood. And ironically, as I think Senator Markey said so well, the lobster migration has contributed to an overabundance in the Gulf of Maine, and that's caused price volatility in the lobster market. So we've seen dramatic fluctuations, which have also affected our fishermen. And of course, the impacts on human health have been dramatic because people are suffering from the impacts of climate change. Rising temperatures increase the number of air pollution action days. They increase pollen and mold. They increase allergies. And all of these things are dangerous to some of our most vulnerable populations, including children. In New Hampshire, we have one of the highest childhood asthma rates in the country because of air pollution that's been moving primarily from the Midwest, but now is being exacerbated by climate change. The elderly are affected, those with allergies, those with chronic respiratory conditions. And rising temperatures also facilitate the spread of insect-borne illnesses such as Lyme disease, which have been a huge factor for people in New Hampshire and across New England. Now, because New Hampshire and the northeastern states and New England have been experiencing major negative impacts from climate change, we've been working to reduce carbon emissions, to try and transition to a more energy efficient and clean energy economy. New Hampshire is one of 9 northeastern states that participates in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, since the program launched in 2009, and Massachusetts and Rhode Island are also participants. But carbon emissions in RGGI states have fallen by 51%. So in less than a decade, because of RGGI, we've seen a 51% reduction in carbon emissions. In addition, customers in RGGI states have saved an estimated $773 million on their energy bills, and billions more are expected. That's thanks not just to renewables, but to energy efficiency. And I'm a big believer that energy efficiency is also one of the most important ways we can reduce our carbon emissions. And also the wholesale price of energy has fallen. So we can see on average 6.4% and 773 million in energy savings. So climate change, as everyone who has spoken to this evening has pointed out, is probably the greatest environmental challenge the world has ever faced. But we can do something about it if we take action. Through smart energy policies, through thoughtful conservation measures, we can stop climate change from reaching dangerous, irreversible levels. But we have to act now. So I urge my colleagues, I urge this administration to recognize the economic and environmental imperative of addressing climate change before it's too late. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.